Hello and a very warm welcome to another episode of ETCFO presents ET Studio CFO Blueprint in association with SAP. I'm your host Divina Lasson, and on this episode we delve into balancing risk and growth in Indian startups. Now, Indian startups must carefully balance innovation with stability. Managing financial risks, especially during rapid expansion, is key, ensuring liquidity and long-term sustainability. Now, handling regulatory risks, diversifying revenue streams, and much more is the order of the day in the Indian startup ecosystem. So stay tuned for an episode that uncovers the future of growth for Indian startups with our esteemed guest today, Abhinav Jain Ranka, SVP Finance, CoinDCX, Prashant Mahagaonkar, Group CFO, Citius Tech, and Rahul Baheti, CFO, SAP, India Subcontinent. Hi, gentlemen. Welcome. Thank you so much for joining us on ET Studio. Such a pleasure to have you today. Thank you. So, gentlemen, let's start with a little bit of context setting. If each of you can help us understand what, in your experience and your opinion, does it really take for startup to balance growth and risk, keeping all the various factors in mind in this, of course, very VUCA world that we're living in? Just a little bit of an overview. Abhinav, let's start with you.
First of all, thank you, Devina, for having me here. And as a human being, we are actually very bad in predicting future. But if we see it properly, we are actually bad in predicting surprises.
Sure. Yes.
Wherever we can predict things, we should, of course, create safeguards, or we should put guardrails. And as a business, I always suggest to keep or to take calculated risks.
Yes.
And see, startup ecosystem is evolving thing.
Absolutely.
And I always believe perfection is a journey and not a stage in anybody's journey. So while reaching a perfection, there are a set of evolution that you always look at. During this journey, you are always looking to become perfect. And in this journey, you keep on experimenting.
Yes.
In the initial days, you always afford to fail. But at later stage, when you reach a level, it becomes more and more difficult to experiment and change or introduce new thing in your product journey, in your product category and all. Innovation comes from experiments.
Absolutely.
And with experiment, you give better and better to your customer. And that's how you evolve as a category, you evolve as a company. So resilience is the most important thing. And see, at young stage or at early stage, when you have very limited thing to lose. You afford to fail. Yeah. But good part is you fail fast and move faster from it.
Yes, absolutely.
So initial stage, experimenting and all, there's no problem. But once you reach a scale, you cannot experiment a lot. I always suggest to have one wing, or if you have multiple businesses, one business should always be learning new things. And that's how things will evolve over a period of time. So once you reach a scale, you cannot change multiple things at a time. But doing small changes will always help you grow. Like I always used to say, a series of development in a candle will not make it electric bulb. Innovation is one thing, but you need to always think out of box.
Yes.
And you need to think how my competition is doing, what my customers are looking, and how I can become more and more better in my service to my customer, service to my society. That's how it's a journey. You need to balance it. Early stage, you fail, there's no problem. But at later stage, you cannot do too many things.
Yes.
That's how it works.
So it's really about balancing that innovation aspect and slowly progressing over the years. Yeah, wonderful. Thank you for that insight. Prashant?
See, having worked with startups now for 15 years of my career, I think the interesting part about startups is living on the edge, if I may say.
Yes.
You are continuously thinking of doing not necessarily different things, but probably the same thing in a better manner.
Yes.
It's about execution. It's not necessarily about innovating daily. It's about innovating right.
Yes, wonderful.
So essentially, I have seen over a period of time, as you rightly pointed out, initially you're okay to fail. Over a period of time, you've got your, if I may call it, secret sauce of the business. then you focus on that, you innovate on that particular stream and make it big over a period of time. Startup journey is about creating something, scaling,
Yes.
and then making an impact on the overall business. So I think that's where I believe it, that it's an interesting journey.
Yes, absolutely. Wonderful. We're going to deep dive into so much of that through the conversation, but thank you for that, Rahul.
Yeah, so first of all, thank you, Devina, for this opportunity to come here on the show and be part of this esteemed panel with the esteemed guests here.
Yes, absolutely.
So I've been with SAP for almost 16 years now, and one interesting thing that we have learned is every challenge and the risk actually poses a lot of opportunities for us.
Absolutely.
And that's what we saw not only in the startup world, but though we are existing for the last 50 years at the global level and 30 years in India.
Yes.
When Corona hit us, actually after Corona, we felt that it's a completely new world. We started considering ourselves as a startup itself. And the best part was we became actually innovative, as the other guest mentioned, because we started thinking of what is that we can come up differently for the customers, because now the customers are not able to meet each other, right? And then our journey for the cloud began. And we actually grew 7 times in the last 5 years. So that's the kind of growth that can take place, provided you consider every challenge and risk as an opportunity.
As an opportunity.
Yeah, absolutely.
Wonderful. Wow. What great advice really for our viewers today. But Rahul, also, so in your experience again, of course, SAP has been in India for so many years now. So you come from a very interesting vantage point, because you also work with a variety of organizations, variety of sectors. So what have you observed really as some of the very unique challenges that Indian startups specifically face, and any anecdotes on how they can be overcome?
Fantastic. So challenges actually are there everywhere for every company, whether it's a startup or a company which is there for 50 years, right? But in case of the startups, the most important thing that they need to really keep in mind on the challenge is how easy or difficult it is for the competition to enter the market.
Right.
If you can have a product or a solution or a service that is being rendered which is exclusive, then there is no problem. But if it can be replicated very easily, that's where you are going to struggle.
Sure.
And if you see, let's take an example of telecom industry. Right, in 2000 to 2005, government decided to privatize the telecom sector, and a lot of private players came into play. Obviously, in 1990s, telecom was actually a privilege to few, right? And 2 decades later, it became a necessity for everybody. So just imagine the amount of customers that have got created, or the market that has got created. So these kind of challenges, actually the constraint created an opportunity for a lot of companies. Now, but at the same point in time, the second challenge that was faced by these telecom companies was on the pricing war, right? Everybody wanted to take the subscribers from the other service provider, and that's where the 15 telecom service providers got converted into 4, and the pricing war actually created a big challenge for a lot of startups that came into India at that point in time. But then, you have this, and then immediately after the pricing war, another thing that you will have to keep in mind is how easy it is for you to create a substitute.
Right.
And if the substitutes are available in the market, then again you are going to be in challenge. And then we saw that during the airline industry as well, because a lot of substitutes were available. It was not possible to retain the customers. While you have acquired the customers by paying a huge sum of money, but then the retention was a challenge, right? And then you started realizing that at the time of retention, actually you have started losing on the customers. So when it comes to the challenges, there are multiple business challenges, and you have to be aware of how do you mitigate that. And then you really need to have a lot of funding backup. You need to have some business houses at the back of your company to support you. And when you look at the risks that are there, the risks are predominantly the regulatory risks, the environmental risks that you have. Environmental risks in the last 20 years, we would have seen a lot of companies actually getting shut down. Even the old companies, the new startup companies, why? Because the regulation said that you are creating pollution, and hence you have to shut down your business. Regulatory risk in terms of the taxes has always been a challenge in our country. In the last 5-6 years, a lot of gaming companies came up, right? Again, a new market was created. But then all of a sudden, there was a different interpretation of a particular tax law, and then everything comes to a standstill. Right? So these are the risks which you have to be ready. Few of them you can control, few of them you can avoid, but few of them obviously are going to remain, right? And these days, again, the risks on the regulatory front are just increasing day by day, right? And everybody has to be ready with those risks. And again, a couple of examples. At least till 2010, 2015, very few changes used to take place in the tax laws, maybe once in a year when the finance bill is going to be announced, right? When the finance budget is to come. But these days, just look at the windfall tax, right? A new concept that has got introduced, right, for the oil and gas companies, and then windfall tax is going to be revised every possibly quarter.
Yes.
That's where you get into challenges. You have to be completely aware of what is that we need to be ready with. Or think of the import duties or the export duties, which government will levy in India, or even the governments outside of India would levy based on. If you are an exporter and export duties are levied, you are in trouble, right? And if you are an importer of raw material and 80% of your finished goods cost is coming from import and import duties are levied, again you are in trouble, right?
Absolutely.
So you have to be ready with all kinds of regulatory risks that will come your way, because if you don't address them, then the sustenance itself is going to be a challenge.
Yes, absolutely. Please.
If I may add. So I think one of the biggest challenges, having worked, as I said, for 15 years in this space, is limited resources, both financial as well as talent. Now, how do you make good of those resources is the biggest challenge one faces in the startup environment. Second, brand is not there. So how in the limited resources you have to create a brand is another challenge which you walk as we go along. Third, attracting talent. Forget retaining, first attracting it. How do we structure pay packages? How do you reward people? Is something which you always think about in a startup. So essentially, if you look at it, right, while other companies do have other challenges, but in a startup world, right, essentially it's the crunch of resources which makes it acute for us to deliver at, like in India, they say, the best possible cost is what the return on investment would be for a startup.
Absolutely, very valid. What would you say would be some of the solutions that you could offer to our viewers today? As you rightly said, attracting the right talent, brand development, slowly, literally from scratch, you're building a completely new entity. So what would be some of the key takeaways?
So I'll take the brand question first. See, one of the things you could always do, or we've done, in terms of having strategic partnerships. You have big players who are there. If you could partner with them, your brand automatically enhances. Then you have the traditional way of marketing where you create brand, go out in the market and establish. So branding is that. Talent retention. Now, you have to get the people who are excited to work in startups. Yes, it is about compensation, but it is also about the sense that you've achieved something. Which is lacking. You're just not part of a process. You're doing something. Even in finance, you're looking at things not necessarily as a traditional finance guy. You're looking at it from a business perspective. So I think giving that feeling of what you can achieve and the benefit you can give to the organization is one thing. Like in our case, we work in healthcare. So when people hear that, whatever you do affects patients' lives. It's very, very heartwarming for people. Second, compensation itself. Yes, there is cash compensation, but there is also ESOPs. ESOPs is an integral part of the compensation when it comes to startup, and that can be a big differential as you go along.
Sure, wonderful. Yeah, really interesting. It's so much about the sentiment that you can create amongst aspiring joinees. Yeah, wonderful. Thank you. Abhinav, we're talking so much, as Rahul rightly said, risk, compliance, regulatory, ever evolving in India. And I think in your industry, you faced a fair amount of such issues. Can you take us through a little bit of some of the biggest threats that you faced, some of the biggest challenges when it comes to risk and compliance?
I think with evolution of technology or disruption in technology, even government is also now very actively using technology in day-to-day compliances. And see, earlier compliance used to be a post-facto event. Versus now it is part of the transaction only. So whenever there's any transaction that is happening, the compliance is no more a separate thing to a transaction. Now it is an integral part of the transaction itself. And one need to understand the cost of non-compliance is much more than the cost of compliances.
Absolutely, yes.
It is basically multifold, and not only in terms of payout, but in terms of brand. Even say like external stakeholders are again not happy with non-compliant thing, but even like internal stakeholder, investor will not prefer a non-compliant company to be invested in. Employee will not be happy to part of a company which is non-compliant. Nobody can these days take compliance as a non-priority item.
Yeah.
In our sector, of course, we take compliance very seriously because as of now, there are not very clear regulations,
Exactly.
so that have more burden on us to ensure we are much more compliant. So whenever compliant or regulations are in place, we are ahead in the game.
Yep, absolutely. Prashant, coming back to your point on, again, creating that sentiment amongst people who are keen to join startups, create that sense of ownership. What does it really take from an organizational perspective to create a culture of innovation, but from a very organizational, fundamental standpoint?
Sure. So if you look at, how we went about doing it for the past 10 years I've been with Citius Tech, essentially we created simple structures like strategic initiatives, market strategic initiatives, wherein, teams had a specific guardrail kind of format where they used to propose to the management as to what they want to do.
Okay, nice.
And essentially then there would be a funding given to them. So
Okay.
you are creating, it's a simple framework, but you're essentially creating empowerment within the teams
Yes.
to present to the management, and then they can deliver to the goals which they have set.
Yeah.
Now, it could include things like, do you have a customer to do your POC? It could be things like, okay, if we fund, what is the minimum viable product or initiative which you're going to present? So things like that, you can really create a framework within the organization. Similarly, on the inward-looking functions,
Yes.
the in-house functions, we have a construct called Citius Tech projects, wherein if there's a problem, let's say you have a problem with the finance process, you create a multi-people team, not more than 4-6 people,
Okay.
including juniors, to address the problem with a particular guardrail, that within 4 weeks it has to be addressed. Now what happens then, consistently,
Yes.
you are looking at things. There is feedback which is coming your way. So feedbacks act as a very important tool for us, because consistent feedback, whether customer or in-house, we do third-party feedback also.
Okay.
Make sure that our processes are in line with what the organization should be. In startups, you can't create a totally controlled process because that can be
definitely not.
bureaucratic to the
Yes.
core. So how do you balance that?
Yeah.
Is also something as part of innovation, you'll have to figure out what is the right balance you have to do as you grow as an organization.
Yeah, absolutely. Case by case. Yeah, sure. And Rahul, to extend this to you when it comes to creating that culture in the environment, what does it also really take to create a risk awareness and risk consciousness really integrated into the fabric and DNA of a startup in India?
So actually, Abhinav rightly mentioned, GRC, whether it is governance, risk and compliance, has to be done from day one. So it's
Yes.
not an option or an alternative available
yes.
to anybody, right? And if you are going to focus on the risk aspects, better to have the right internal controls and the systems in place from day one. And it has to be done at the transaction level.
Yes.
See, our country is also changing, right? We always used to feel that management, accounting or reporting is going to take place only at the end of the financial year. But that's not true anymore.
No.
It has to be done on a regular basis. It's an ongoing project and you have to continuously find out what is that we need to change. Let me give you an example. Last year, government came up with certain guidelines, right, for security aspects. Now, for these certain guidelines, you have to be aware because within 24 hours, you have to report back to the government in case if there has been cyber attack.
Yes.
Or
yes.
we also saw a lot of ransomware attacks actually taking place after the corona, right? And again, during that time, possibly we did not had systems to actually address that. And then companies were shut down for a few days, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that's where the challenges were created. Here, unless and until you have a very robust system to address to these requirements on the compliance, and you have strong systems, internal as well as external, because a lot of times what would happen is internally you are trying to create full systems control, which is there in part of your ERP or an accounting system, but things which are beyond your control, because assume that supply chain, everything is connected these days, right? And then there is a strike, and then your vehicles cannot get out of the factory, and
What
then
do you
the
do?
whole stock is piled up, right? So a lot of such challenges which are on the external nature also have to be thought in. And especially our experience is on the supply chain front. We have encountered that our customers now are more worried on getting the raw material on time rather than getting the raw material at a better price.
Really? Wow.
Yeah, because
Sure.
that's what has happened. If you look at the pharma companies, if the APIs which were being sent by China, if it is not available,
Yeah.
then you are in trouble, right?
Yeah.
We looked at even the chips which were not available. The entire automotive, the
Yes.
entire electronic industry came to a standstill just because the chips were not available.
Yes.
So the challenge today on the external front is also try to find the alternatives which can be quickly made available rather than relying only on one source of supply, right?
Yeah.
So these are the things which one has to keep in mind, and then obviously you have systems and the softwares and the solutions which are available that can actually help you address this.
Yes, and we're going to deep dive into that as well. But before that, so Abhinav, as you touched upon earlier, of course, being investor friendly and kind of really building that investor confidence is very important for the Indian startups today. What are some of the factors that you would say startups should keep in mind to keep that investor confidence rolling high?
So I think after customer investors are got, in any company, values create value. So you should have a strong governance to have investor confidence, regular communication with investor, timely reporting, strong vision plan with the investor, communicating day-to-day activities or keep submitting KPIs with the investor will always help you. And see, investors are not only invested in your company, they are invested in multiple companies. They always share their learnings from other invested companies, and that will always help you. And see, I always believe there's no point of committing mistakes that already had done it. Sure. You should take learnings from them, and you can, of course, you can have different mistakes that will be learning for others. But this, if you are repeating some solved problem, then it's not a good thing. Sure. And when investors are there, they not only help you in all these things, they help you in growing better and faster compared to competition. And see, clear communication, timely communication always help in these things.
Yeah, absolutely. So the investors are sort of mentors as well to the organization. Yeah, wonderful.
Savina, if I may.
Please.
So I think one of the most important things the investor looks for is like a no surprise policy. Don't surprise the investor with anything.
Yes.
Good or bad, tell them at the first instance.
Sure. Yeah. Transparency.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Second is what you have internally is what you report to the investors. You can't have different MISs going to the investor versus what is happening internally. I think that's a strict no-no. Once you start, and it's a partnership which you're building with the investor. Investor is not necessarily only a financial investor. He is your partner in building the business. Because as a startup, what you look for is a partner who can do well for you. And therefore, even while selecting an investor, when you're on the road, it's not necessarily only the valuation which matters. In fact, valuation should come much lower in the order. It's what they bring on the table, whether it's the network, the set of advisors, if they have a lot of exposure in the space which you are working for. I think that's really what it is. It's a partnership.
Absolutely. And to take it one level further, can you give some input and guidance on what it really takes for organizations who are seeking for IPO? Okay. I know it's a big question, but if you can kind of break it down a little bit step by step, just some key takeaways here.
Yep. So I would step back first as to why an IPO.
Sure. Yeah.
I think organizations should be clear as to why they are doing an IPO. Okay, leading a life post an IPO is very different from having any other investor on board. So the question which needs to be first addressed is why an IPO, and it could be various things. It could be primary source of capital. It could be investors wanting to exit. It could be brand building activity. It could be anything. But we should be clear on why.
Yeah.
I think once that problem is solved, then the entire gamut of advisors and all can be onboarded, and then you start the path of the IPO process. I think as a finance person, right, you are the most important person who will take the company to an IPO. And your journey doesn't end by taking the company IPO. Your journey actually begins again post the IPO to lead the quarterly life of an IPO. So I think for a company who is trying to do an IPO, as I said, understanding why is important, and then having the right advisor, whether it is bankers, whether it is auditors, smaller things like what KPIs you want to show are very important. Having the analyst community onboarded early to make sure that the coverage is good so that your stock performs in a particular. It's not necessarily only your financials which reflect on the stock market. Yes, long term it is true, but in the short term there are various sentiments which can play for you. So how do you manage those? Is an important learning as an organization you have to do.
Yes, absolutely. Wonderful. Abhinav, anything you'd like to add to this?
As Prashant said, so after IPO, your reporting gamut, of course, increases. Earlier, there were a set of investors whom you were reporting. Now, you are open to public, and your reporting KPIs should be strong enough. And it has to be, of course, within the framework that is prescribed. But it has to be very on time and in full. And see, after IPO, everything that you are doing, you are answerable to large public.
Yes.
And you have to ensure there's nothing wrong is being done on any front.
Yeah.
So before IPO, you need to ensure your reporting framework, your governance, everything should be robust enough.
Yes.
Because there are set of investors who are expecting results on time, in full, and you can't miss anything while reporting to public. And once you go public, you have a moral responsibility also, because you are answerable to such a large community on whatever you are doing and however you are doing.
Absolutely. Thank you both for simplifying a very complex topic here. Rahul, so to get you in on this, let's move a little bit to the aspect and the role of technology, right? Again, from your standpoint, you work with so many organizations. How have you seen the role of especially emerging tech? We can't have any conversation without talking about Gen AI, the role of AI and so on. So what is really the role of emerging technology that you're seeing playing today in the organizational processes?
So actually, Prashant rightly mentioned that if at all you have to bring in transparency, whether it is for the investor or whether it is for a banker or for a lender or for your suppliers or customers, you really need something which has got a very strong backing as far as the systems are concerned. And on the IPO point, it's very interesting to see 4 of the 5 unicorns that went for IPO actually were using SAP.
Okay, right? Wonderful, good to know.
So interestingly, see, for every company, obviously you will need a end-to-end system, and then whether it is from a procurement perspective, or we look at the digital supply chain where you need information which is real time.
Yeah.
Right, and the information has to flow in from multiple facets, because now the supply chain is not limited only to your factory or the ancillaries which are available around, because a lot of things will be imported, few of the things have to depend on contract manufacturing and so on and so forth. So when this real-time data has to be processed, accuracy has to be maintained, you need to have the right levels of inventory, because if you miss on anything, then the cost of production obviously is going to be significantly higher, and that's where the business AI or the robotic process automation or the Gen AI capabilities actually make play a very important role. And now this is on the manufacturing side. You have to take care of the shop floor, the various lines which will be running on the shop floor. You have to be careful about that when it comes to even fintech industry, education industry, hospitality industry. You have to have the data which has to be safeguarded also. At the same point in time, you should be able to extract whatever information that you need at the right point in time from millions of records, right? And this is possible only when you have a very strong and robust system, because just imagine today we have got close to few billion transactions that takes place on UPI on a daily basis, right? Now, if these billion transactions are to be analyzed, and if it was to be left to human beings, it will take few years, right? And then you need systems like the various OEMs that you have who will be able to process this data very fast. Another thing that we also see is today, just imagine, I mean, this is at least my experience, that you are traveling and you are going from a particular locality, right? And there is a big mall around you. You will keep getting SMSs quickly that you have some options today, right?
Yeah.
Now, just imagine, how is this possible? I mean, you are thinking that, okay, I am planning to travel to US, and then all of a sudden, your app also starts showing up few things which are related to that. See, possibly this is all because of business AI or the Gen AI or Internet of Things, which actually help you process the data. First is pull the data, give you the right input, and then actually try to get your focus towards something that you might not have thought of. And
Yes.
that's the only way in which these companies are today trying to attract more customers,
Yes.
increase their footfall, and that's the only way in which you can get more growth. So I think when it comes to the use of the technology, including the business AI, Gen AI, blockchain, it's not only about internal, but it's also something which is going to help you improve your business and grow your business
Absolutely,
further. So I think
absolutely.
it's required everywhere.
Tremendous impact here, definitely. No, thank you for that. Gentlemen, thank you so much. It's been such a lovely conversation. Before we wrap up, could you each leave us with one key takeaway again for all our viewers today on what you think is a big factor that Indian startups need to look at when it comes to balancing risk and growth as well? One key takeaway.
So I
Abhinav?
think I always believe future belong to those who are fast in adopting the change in technology and fast in adopting changing business landscape. So you have to be on top of technology that your industry is evolving for. And see, now earlier there used to be customer demand pyramid, which is now taking shape of cake, where candle is a luxury brand and rest all is commodity. At commodity, you always be at lower margins and super efficient product quality. And without technology, you cannot achieve it, because you are producing at scale. If anything goes wrong, you cannot afford to have that mistake. And when you're supplying to large public, you're gone in some simple mistake.
Yeah. Very tricky. Thank you. Prashant?
I think eventual goal for a startup has to be profitable growth.
Of course.
You have different stages which you go through. As he rightly said, initially you can fail, you can try out things, but eventual goal with a target in mind, that when do you move to a profitable growth, is something which has to be kept in mind by a startup. And based on that, you plan your activity for the first few years to do the risky bets, if I may call sometimes, but at the same time with a vision in mind that a particular point of time you have to turn around. And honestly, Zomato is a classic example of how they've turned around the business over a period of time.
Absolutely. Excellent. Thank you. Rahul?
So if I have to put in one sentence for the startups, necessity is the mother of invention, and that's how actually startups were born, right? And if at all they have to sustain, then they have to be really innovative, even in terms of looking at using the latest technology and the systems. And I think they would sustain.
Absolutely. Innovation is key. Gentlemen, thank you so much. It's been such a pleasure. Thank you for joining us today on ET Studios.
Thank you.
All right, with that note, we conclude this episode of ETCFO presents ET Studio CFO Blueprint in association with SAP. But do join us next time as we continue to decode the strategies and insights that define modern financial leadership. Remember, the blueprint for growth starts with the CFO. Until next time, many thanks for watching.